Emma woke up early that morning, the city still wrapped in the soft glow of dawn, her heart beating fast with excitement and nerves. Today was her first day at the Sterling, one of the most prestigious restaurants in town, where millionaires, celebrities, and business tycoons often came for lunch or dinner. She had heard stories about the atmosphere there. Polished floors, crystal chandeliers, and waitstaff moving with precise grace, every detail meticulously planned. She carefully chose her outfit, a crisp white blouse and black slacks, making sure her hair was tied neatly and her shoes polished. She wanted to make a good first impression. Knowing this job could open doors she had only dreamed about. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the restaurant keys, and she took a deep breath to calm herself, imagining herself walking through the elegant doors, serving dishes to the city's most influential people. As she entered the Sterling, she was struck by the grandeur of the place, the soft hum of conversation blending with the clinking of silverware and the faint scent of gourmet food. She felt a mix of awe and nervousness, realizing that she would be part of this world now, even if only as a small part. The manager, a tall woman with a commanding presence, welcomed her warmly and gave her a brief tour, showing her the tables, the kitchen entrance, and the staff area. Emma tried to absorb every detail, knowing she had to remember everything to avoid mistakes. Her training had been short but intense, yet nothing could prepare her for the real atmosphere of a fully packed restaurant. The lunch crowd was already arriving, and the air felt charged with energy. She watched the other waiters glide between tables, taking orders with confidence, balancing trays effortlessly, and she realized that she would have to learn quickly to keep up. The pressure was high, but she was determined to do her best. As she walked past the large dining hall, she noticed a table that immediately drew her attention. A group of men in sharp suits were seated, talking in low, serious voices, papers and tablets scattered across the table, and a large man at the center commanded attention effortlessly. His presence radiated authority and wealth. Emma knew immediately that he was someone important, and she later learned he was Richard Langston, one of the city's most powerful CEOs, preparing for a meeting that could change his company forever. She felt a small shiver run down her spine, partly from nerves and partly from excitement. This was the first time she would serve someone of such influence, and she reminded herself to stay calm and professional. She adjusted her notepad and took a deep breath, telling herself that she could handle this. After all, she had trained for moments like this, even if she hadn't imagined the intensity of the atmosphere she was about to face. As she approached the table to offer water and menus, she noticed the expressions on the faces of the men. Some focused on their devices, others whispering to each other, and all of them seemed tense. Emma realized immediately that this was no ordinary lunch. This was a high-stakes moment. Every gesture and word mattered, and even a small mistake could have serious consequences. She straightened her posture and smiled politely, hoping to appear confident despite the nervous flutter in her chest. The CEO glanced up briefly, his sharp eyes assessing her quickly before returning to the documents in front of him. Emma felt the weight of that gaze, realizing that she was being silently judged. She took a careful step back, ensuring she gave them enough space, and spoke softly as she offered their drink choices. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The men barely looked at her, absorbed in their discussion, yet she remained focused, understanding that her role, though small, was crucial in keeping the environment professional and smooth. During those first few minutes, Emma observed everything, noticing the subtle hierarchy of the table, the way the CEO's assistant leaned slightly forward whenever he spoke, the way the other executives exchanged knowing glances, and how tension seemed to hang in the air like an invisible weight. She felt like a fly on the wall in a world she had only read about. Yet she was now a part of it, even if only for a short time, and that realization gave her both pride and anxiety. By the time she finished serving the drinks and stepping back, Emma's nerves had settled slightly, replaced with a growing determination. She promised herself that she would not let fear control her actions. She would observe carefully, act wisely, and if needed, find the courage to speak up, even if it meant facing someone as powerful as the CEO. The day had just begun, and already, she felt that this shift would be unlike any other she had ever experienced. A moment where ordinary service would collide with extraordinary decisions, and she was right at the center of it. Emma moved carefully through the dining hall, her eyes scanning the room as she balanced her tray with drinks. The restaurant was buzzing now, the earlier calm replaced by a low hum of conversation, laughter, and the occasional clatter of cutlery. Yet at one table, time seemed to move differently, where Richard Langston and his team sat. There was a tension that seemed almost tangible, like a storm hovering just above their heads. She noticed the subtle signs immediately. The CEO's jaw was tight, his fingers drumming impatiently on the polished table, while his assistants whispered hurriedly into their earpieces, glancing nervously at their phones. Emma realized that this was no ordinary business lunch. Every movement, every glance, every word carried weight. The stakes were high, and the pressure was almost suffocating. The executives surrounding Langston were equally focused, their faces serious, brows furrowed, and hands occasionally brushing over documents and contracts as if confirming the importance of each detail. Emma watched as one man leaned forward to speak, only to be cut off gently but firmly by the CEO, who seemed to command the room effortlessly. Yet the tension in the air betrayed that even he was feeling the weight of what was about to happen. As she approached the table to refill glasses, Emma couldn't help but overhear fragments of their conversation. Words like deadline, merger, and commitment floated toward her. And though she didn't understand the full context, she could sense the urgency. The stakes were enormous, and she felt a strange mix of fear and fascination, realizing that she was serving drinks to people who could change the lives of thousands with a single signature. Emma also noticed the body language, the subtle power plays, and unspoken hierarchies. She saw the way one executive leaned slightly forward whenever he spoke, trying to gain the CEO's attention, and how another executive stayed back, watching quietly, weighing every word before responding. Emma understood in that moment that this table was not just a group of businessmen. It was a stage, and every gesture was part of a carefully performed act. Despite the tension, Emma remained calm, reminding herself to focus on her job. She took a steadying breath, placed the drinks gently in front of the men, and stepped back to observe. She could feel the CEO's sharp eyes flicker toward her briefly, assessing her presence, but she didn't let it shake her. She knew her role was important, not just to serve, but to ensure the environment remained smooth and professional. The air around the table seemed almost electric. Conversations happening elsewhere in the restaurant seemed distant, muffled by the intensity of the discussion unfolding before her. Emma watched as a phone buzzed, and one of the executives quickly glanced at the screen, typing rapidly before tucking it back into his pocket. Small moments like these told her that the team was managing multiple pressures at once. Every second counted, every action mattered. As she circled the table again, Emma noticed that the CEO had leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. But there was a subtle shift in the room, a pause that indicated something important was about to happen. Whispers passed among the assistants, and Langston's eyes scanned the documents once more, checking figures, contracts, and notes. Emma's curiosity grew, yet she kept her professionalism, knowing that any mistake could ruin her first day. The staff around her moved like clockwork, yet Emma couldn't help but feel the contrast between the smooth operations of the restaurant and the high-stakes chaos at Langston's table. It was fascinating to see how calm everyone else appeared while this small group seemed to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. She realized that she was witnessing a moment in history, even if no one else would remember the small details except her. She took another careful glance at the CEO, noticing how every small detail of his surroundings seemed to matter to him. The placement of pens, the way documents were stacked, even the temperature of the room seemed to influence his mood. Emma felt a mix of awe and respect, understanding that success at this level required precision, focus, and control, and that even the smallest interruption could have consequences. Emma reminded herself to stay alert. Every step, every word, every tray carried could have an impact on the delicate balance of the room. She moved quietly, offering small refills and gentle smiles, all while observing and learning. She noticed the subtle cues, the slight nods, the tightened lips, the controlled gestures that spoke volumes more than words, and she felt herself becoming more aware, more confident, ready to act if needed. As the tension built, Emma sensed that something significant was about to occur. The CEO's eyes flicked toward the door momentarily, his expression unreadable, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The other executives stiffened, waiting for cues, for signals, and Emma realized that the next moments could define everything. The $200 million deal was hanging in the balance, and she was right there, quietly observing the storm. By the end of the lunch's first phase, Emma had grown into her role. The fear she had felt at the start was now replaced by focused awareness. She understood the importance of this table, the people at it, and the drama that unfolded with every passing second. She promised herself silently that she would act with courage and integrity if the moment called for it. And little did she know, that moment would arrive sooner than anyone expected. Emma had been serving tables for only a short while, but as she observed the CEO's table, she began to notice a pattern in his behavior. Richard Langston was not just focused on the deal. He carried an air of arrogance that seemed to affect everyone around him. He spoke in a sharp tone, cutting off his assistants mid-sentence, and his gestures were often dismissive, as if the people in the room existed only to follow his commands. One of his assistants nervously tried to correct a small error in the figures, speaking cautiously, but Langston waved her off with a flick of his hand. His expression hard and unyielding, Emma could see the tension ripple through the table. The assistant's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through papers, while another executive looked down, pretending to check his tablet, clearly uncomfortable with the CEO's behavior. Emma's eyes widened as she realized how his arrogance was creating a fragile atmosphere where one wrong word could trigger a serious reaction. As she moved closer to refill a glass, she overheard Langston speaking to one of his colleagues, his voice low but firm. "We can't afford mistakes. Every detail matters. If this deal falls through, it's on us." Emma understood the seriousness of the situation, but she also noticed the unnecessary harshness in his tone. He was not just focused on results, he seemed to be intimidating those around him to assert control. It made her uneasy. Yet strangely, she admired the level of precision and commitment. Though the manner of delivery was harsh, the other executives were trying to maintain composure, nodding at his words, but Emma could see the discomfort in their eyes. One man whispered something quickly to another, and they both shot a brief glance toward Langston, hoping he wouldn't notice. The CEO, however, seemed completely absorbed in his authority. Unaware that his behavior was straining the very team that was supposed to support him, Emma realized that sometimes power could blind people to the human reactions around them. She remembered her own training, and how important it was to remain professional. Even in tense situations, Emma took a slow, steadying breath, keeping her tray balanced as she approached, knowing that she needed to remain unnoticed yet alert. Any sudden misstep could draw attention, and in a room like this, attention could quickly turn critical. She carefully placed a glass of water in front of an executive, who barely looked up, mumbling a thanks before returning to the discussion. Emma's gaze drifted back to Langston, who was now leaning back in his chair, reviewing a stack of documents, his expression serious and slightly impatient. He tapped his pen repeatedly against the table, a rhythm that seemed to mark the tension in the room. Emma noticed how even the smallest actions, like tapping a pen or folding papers in a certain way, carried meaning to the people at the table, and she realized how high the stakes were. While most of the staff moved about the restaurant smoothly, Emma found herself almost frozen, caught between performing her duties and observing the high-stakes drama unfolding. She felt a mixture of fear and fascination. She had never seen a real billionaire in action before, and the combination of authority, arrogance, and intensity was almost overwhelming. Yet she knew she had to stay professional, and the knowledge that she could act with courage if needed gave her a small but growing confidence. Emma also noticed how the CEO treated other patrons nearby, not just his own team. He occasionally glanced over, and she saw subtle expressions of impatience and condescension directed at anyone he deemed less important. Emma felt a flash of indignation, realizing that he believed his status allowed him to treat everyone beneath him poorly. She knew that this attitude, if unchecked, could create bigger problems, and part of her wished she could say something, though she reminded herself to wait for the right moment. The energy at the table was becoming almost electric. The executives whispered urgently among themselves, occasionally glancing at Langston to gauge his mood. Emma could sense that the room was on edge, that a single unexpected action could shift everything. She moved carefully, offering a subtle smile to the assistant beside her, who gave a small nod in return. Emma's presence, though silent, seemed to provide a small anchor of normalcy in a room full of tension. As the conversation at the table continued, Emma began to imagine how a minor confrontation could escalate. She thought about the power dynamics, the stakes, and the impact of even the smallest interruption. Her heart raced slightly, but her mind stayed clear. She understood that courage sometimes meant speaking up at the right moment, and she silently prepared herself, knowing that this could be that moment, though she didn't yet know exactly how it would come. By the end of her round, Emma had observed enough to understand the fragile balance of the room. She knew that Langston's arrogance could either break the deal or be redirected toward success. She felt a quiet determination, promising herself that if the CEO's behavior crossed a line, she would not remain silent, even if it meant risking confrontation with one of the most powerful men in the city. The lunch had become more than a meal for Emma. It was a lesson in courage, observation, and the subtle art of influence. The tension in the air at the CEO's table was thick. Emma had never felt anything like it before. She moved around the restaurant calmly, but inside, her heart was racing. Every word Richard Langston spoke seemed sharper, every gesture more commanding. She had been watching him for nearly an hour now, observing the way he treated his team, the subtle but unmistakable arrogance in his tone, and the way he expected complete obedience. Emma tried to focus on her duties, refilling water glasses and checking on other tables. But she couldn't take her eyes off the CEO. His behavior was becoming harder to ignore. He snapped at an assistant for a minor mistake, dismissing her words with a wave of his hand. And she saw the young woman flinch, embarrassed and frustrated. Emma felt a mix of fear and anger. She knew she was supposed to stay professional, but she also felt that someone needed to speak up. As Langston continued, Emma noticed a growing unease in the other executives. Their faces tense, shoulders tight, glances exchanged silently as if they were all trying to keep the peace while navigating a minefield. Emma realized that the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. The CEO's arrogance and impatience were creating cracks in the room's balance, and it was only a matter of time before someone's nerves would snap. Emma felt a sudden clarity, a sense that she could no longer remain silent. Her mind raced as she weighed the risks. Confronting a billionaire CEO on her first day could end her job before it had even begun. But doing nothing seemed wrong. She could see the human cost of his behavior right in front of her, and a small, firm voice inside her told her that courage sometimes meant speaking when others stayed quiet. She took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay calm, steady, and respectful, approaching the table slowly, her movements measured so as not to draw unnecessary attention. She placed the water glass down in front of the assistant, then paused, her eyes meeting the CEO's, who looked up briefly, his sharp gaze assessing her. Emma felt the weight of that look but refused to back down. She knew she had to choose her words carefully. Then, with a quiet confidence she hadn't expected she possessed, Emma spoke. "You need to leave, sir." The words were simple, direct, but delivered with a firmness that made the room freeze. Conversation halted, glasses paused midair, and even the waitstaff nearby seemed to notice the sudden shift in energy. The CEO blinked, clearly taken aback, his expression flickering between shock, anger, and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to Langston like that in public before, certainly not someone new on their first day. The room went completely silent. Emma could feel the tension magnify, her heart raced, but she held her ground, refusing to apologize or retreat. She knew the truth of her words, she knew the effect they could have, and for the first time, she felt a surge of control in a place where she had previously felt invisible. Langston's team froze as well, unsure how to react. Some of them looked at Emma with admiration, while others shifted nervously in their chairs. The CEO, however, was visibly rattled. His eyes narrowed, jaw tightening, and hands gripping the edge of the table. Yet beneath the initial shock, there was a moment of reflection. He realized that someone had finally voiced what everyone else had felt but was too afraid to say. Emma could feel the weight of the silence, but she remained calm. Letting her words sink in, she repeated softly, "Sir, your behavior is affecting your team, and it could jeopardize the deal." The room seemed to hold its breath. Executives glanced at each other, some nodding slightly in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. But no one spoke. The power of her honesty hung in the air like a quiet storm. Langston's reaction was slow at first, his face unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair, processing what had just happened. Emma could see the tension in his shoulders begin to ease slightly, as if he were recognizing the truth in her words. He was a man used to control, used to being obeyed without question. Yet her courage had forced him to pause and reflect, to reconsider not just his actions, but the effect they were having on others. Emma stepped back slightly, giving him space, her heart still racing, yet she felt a strange sense of calm, knowing that she had done what needed to be done. The rest of the executives looked on in quiet surprise. The assistants relaxed slightly, grateful that someone had finally broken the tension. The restaurant around them seemed to resume its normal rhythm. Yet at the CEO's table, a small shift had occurred, one that would change the course of the day. By the time Emma returned to the side of the dining hall, she could feel the lingering effect of her words. The storm at the table had not ended, but the direction had changed. A pause, a reflection, a recognition that even the most powerful needed reminders of humanity and respect. Emma knew she had taken a risk, but for the first time, she understood the impact of courage and integrity, and she felt a quiet pride, knowing that sometimes, even the smallest voice could make the biggest difference. After Emma's bold words, the room remained unusually quiet. The usual hum of the restaurant seemed distant as the CEO's team stared at her in shock. Richard Langston's eyes lingered on her, a mixture of surprise, anger, and curiosity flickering across his face. For a moment, no one knew how he would respond. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and everyone at the table seemed to sense that something important had just happened. Langston's initial reaction was a tight-lipped frown. His jaw clenched, and he stared down at the documents before him, tapping his pen lightly as if trying to regain control. His mind raced through the words Emma had spoken, the simplicity of her sentence striking him more than any formal report or advice from his board. She had said what no one dared speak aloud, pointing out the effect his arrogance had on those around him, and for the first time that day, Langston felt a small, uncomfortable sting of self-awareness. The executives at the table shifted in their seats, glances exchanged silently as if asking, will he explode or reflect? Some tried to maintain composure, though the tension was clear on their faces. The assistants breathed slightly easier, grateful that someone had spoken truth. Yet unsure how the CEO would respond, Emma remained calm, standing quietly near the edge of the room, her hands steady, her heart still pounding, knowing that this moment could define the rest of the lunch and, perhaps even her first day. Langston took a slow, deliberate breath, leaning back in his chair, and for the first time, his rigid posture softened slightly. He realized that the pressure he had been placing on his team, his impatience, and his dismissive gestures had not gone unnoticed. It had created a fragile, tense environment that could have jeopardized the deal he was so determined to close. The clarity hit him suddenly. Courage and honesty, even from someone new and low-ranking, could cut through arrogance in a way that no report or advisor ever could. The assistant he had snapped at earlier swallowed nervously, unsure whether to speak, but noticed Langston's eyes scanning the table slowly, and she realized that he was actually reflecting, not reacting. The other executives leaned forward cautiously, as if testing the atmosphere. Noticing that the CEO's anger had not fully erupted, Emma's words had done something unexpected. They had created a pause, a chance for reflection, and in that silence, Langston began to process not only the impact of her words but also the atmosphere he had fostered. Emma could sense the shift, subtle yet profound. The sharp tension that had gripped the table since the beginning of the lunch was slowly easing. Langston's breathing steadied, and the rigid tightness in his shoulders softened. He spoke at last, his tone quieter, less commanding than before. "Perhaps I've been too harsh," he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for the others to hear. The executives exchanged small, surprised looks. No one expected an acknowledgement of fault from a man of his stature. The CEO's eyes returned to Emma briefly, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding. He recognized the courage it took for a newcomer to speak directly to him. The honesty in her voice, and the integrity behind her words. It was a rare reminder that power alone did not guarantee respect, and that sometimes, influence came from those who dared to act with principle. Emma felt a quiet pride, knowing that speaking up had created this effect. Yet she maintained her composure, understanding that her role remained supportive, not confrontational. Langston turned his attention back to the documents, but this time, the atmosphere was different. His team seemed more relaxed, able to think clearly without the weight of constant tension pressing down on them. He noticed the subtle cues he had ignored before. The hesitant glances, the slight hesitations, and the unspoken concerns, and he realized that listening and allowing space for others to act was just as important as issuing orders. Emma's words had given him that space. The executives began to re-engage in the discussion, more focused, more deliberate. The assistant who had been flustered earlier now spoke with confidence, knowing that her input would be received rather than dismissed. Emma observed the change carefully, feeling the satisfaction of having indirectly helped restore balance at the table. The CEO, while still serious, seemed more approachable, less tense, and for the first time that day, the deal itself seemed to have a chance of progressing smoothly. Emma quietly resumed her duties, but she could feel the lingering effect of the confrontation. The room felt lighter, the energy more manageable. She had seen firsthand how courage, honesty, and integrity could influence even the most powerful person in the room. She understood the subtle power of truth, the way a simple, direct statement could shift an entire dynamic, and she knew that this lesson would stay with her far longer than the memory of serving water or carrying trays. By the end of the lunch, it was clear that Langston had been affected, his team more engaged, the mood less tense, and the discussion on the $200 million deal continued with a renewed sense of focus. Emma had played a small but crucial role, and while no one except the CEO and his closest assistants may have fully realized it, the impact of her courage was undeniable. She had transformed a tense, almost volatile environment into one where clarity, reflection, and professionalism could prevail. As Emma moved to the next table, she allowed herself a quiet, proud smile, knowing that her words had made a difference. The CEO had paused, reflected, and begun to adjust his behavior. The assistants felt relief, and the executives regained composure. All because one new waitress dared to speak up. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the right words at the right time, even from the least expected source, could change the course of events, and for Emma, it was a moment she would never forget. After the pause caused by Emma's bold words, Richard Langston sat back in his chair. Taking a moment to think, the energy around the table had shifted subtly. The tension that had been almost unbearable earlier was now replaced with a cautious calm. He realized that he had been too focused on controlling every detail and intimidating his team, and in doing so, he had risked undermining the very deal he had worked so hard to secure. Langston's eyes moved across the table, studying his assistants and executives. He could see the slight relaxations in their posture, the small smiles that hinted at relief, and he understood that his harshness had been more harmful than helpful. Emma's words echoed in his mind, simple, direct, and true. They forced him to confront something he rarely allowed himself to consider. That leadership was not only about authority, but also about respect and collaboration. He shifted in his seat and leaned forward slightly, folding his hands on the table. For the first time that day, he truly listened, really paid attention to the people around him, their input, their concerns, and their ideas. He realized that rushing the deal, pushing everyone to the edge, and maintaining a facade of invincibility had almost jeopardized the entire $200 million negotiation. The truth was undeniable. Without a clear, calm team, no amount of authority or wealth could guarantee success. Langston's assistant spoke quietly, suggesting a small adjustment to the presentation of numbers, and he listened without interruption, considering the logic in her words. His eyes scanned the documents with renewed focus, and he noticed errors and opportunities that he had previously overlooked. The room felt lighter now, freer, less like a battlefield and more like a collaborative workspace, and Langston understood that Emma's intervention had created this space for reflection, a moment that allowed him to regain control in a smarter, more thoughtful way. He addressed the table in a calmer tone than before, explaining his observations and inviting opinions. The executives leaned in, eager to contribute, and the discussion flowed with a new sense of clarity. The assistants spoke more confidently, knowing their ideas were welcomed rather than dismissed. Emma quietly observed from a distance, feeling a sense of satisfaction and quiet pride. The subtle shift she had caused with her courage was now transforming the entire dynamic of the meeting. The CEO's mind worked quickly, mapping out the remaining steps needed to secure the deal. He realized that by pausing, listening, and acknowledging the team's input, he had actually strengthened their approach. He could see the benefits immediately. Fewer mistakes, more creative solutions, and a group that was engaged rather than intimidated. Langston silently thanked Emma, understanding that without her intervention, he might have pushed too hard, too fast, and jeopardized everything. As the meeting progressed, Langston reviewed the key figures, noting adjustments and clarifications suggested by his team. He encouraged debate and discussion, something he rarely did in such high-stakes situations. The executives responded positively, their confidence returning, and with each small success, the atmosphere became less tense, more productive, and Langston felt a sense of relief he hadn't expected, realizing that stepping back had been just as crucial as pushing forward. Meanwhile, Emma continued her rounds in the restaurant, keeping an eye on the table without interfering. She noticed the CEO occasionally glance in her direction. A subtle acknowledgement, a recognition that her words had mattered. She smiled quietly to herself. Knowing she had made a difference without needing praise or recognition, the lesson was clear. Courage, honesty, and integrity, even from someone in a small position, could influence even the most powerful people. Langston took a final look at the documents, reviewing the last figures and ensuring that everything was accurate. He felt a rare moment of satisfaction, knowing that the deal was on track, and it wasn't just his efforts that made it possible. It was the combined input of his team and the courage of someone who had spoken the truth. The $200 million merger was no longer just a series of numbers. It was now a result of collaboration, reflection, and mutual respect, and he understood the value of pausing and listening before making critical decisions. By the end of the meeting, the executives felt a renewed sense of purpose. The assistants moved with confidence, and Langston himself carried a new understanding of leadership. He had seen firsthand that authority alone could not achieve success, and that humility and awareness of the people around him were equally important. Emma's words had not just paused the arrogance. They had sparked a transformation, one that would make the $200 million deal stronger and more secure than it would have been otherwise. As the lunch concluded, Langston rose, offering a nod of acknowledgement to Emma, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and respect. He did not need to speak aloud what everyone had already witnessed. A small act of courage had shifted the balance, saved the deal, and reminded everyone in the room, even the billionaire CEO, that leadership was as much about listening and reflecting as it was about power. Emma returned to her station, quietly proud, aware that her first day had become unforgettable. She had seen the power of speaking truth with respect, and had watched the ripple effect of one brave act influence even the most high-powered executives. The $200 million deal was moving forward, and in a subtle but important way, she had been part of that success, a reminder that courage and integrity can create change where no amount of authority can. After the CEO paused and reflected on Emma's words, the energy at the table began to change. Richard Langston's tone softened. His gestures became more deliberate, and the executives around him responded with renewed focus. The tension that had gripped the room earlier was easing, replaced with a sense of clarity and collaboration. Emma watched quietly from a distance, her heart still beating fast, but a small smile forming as she realized the situation was improving. The assistants, who had been nervous moments before, began speaking with more confidence, suggesting solutions and clarifying numbers without hesitation. Langston listened carefully, nodding and occasionally asking questions, encouraging discussion rather than shutting it down. It was a remarkable transformation in such a short time, and Emma felt proud knowing that her simple act of courage had sparked this change. The room no longer felt like a battlefield but a space where everyone could contribute. Langston reviewed the merger documents once again, carefully checking every figure, every clause, every note. He had never felt such focus on detail in his life, and yet, he realized that it was easier now because the team was fully engaged, understanding, and ready to help. Emma had created a moment of reflection that allowed him to see the process differently, to trust the people around him, and to recognize that collaboration often produced better results than sheer authority. The executives began discussing the remaining points of the deal with precision, highlighting areas that required clarification, and Langston, now calmer and more deliberate, addressed each concern with thoughtful responses. The flow of conversation was smoother, and everyone seemed more confident in their roles. Emma observed the subtle changes. The assistant who had been flustered earlier now spoke clearly, making important points, and the executives nodded, appreciative of the constructive approach. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the room. As the lunch continued, Langston leaned back briefly, reflecting on the $200 million deal. He realized that the success of this merger depended not only on the numbers but also on the people involved, their focus, and their ability to work together. He understood that without a balanced, calm team, even the best strategies could fail, and he quietly thanked Emma in his mind for creating this shift. Her courage had allowed him to pause, rethink, and re-engage, and that pause had made all the difference. The discussion turned to the final details, the executives offering their insights, the CEO asking questions, and the assistants providing additional support. Emma noticed how well everyone interacted now. The room no longer crackled with tension but buzzed with productive energy. The deal that had seemed precarious moments ago was now on steady ground, and Langston's calm, thoughtful approach ensured that no mistakes would be overlooked. The $200 million merger was finally progressing smoothly. Langston looked at the clock briefly, realizing that time had passed quickly, and yet, the team had accomplished so much. He smiled subtly, thinking about how a small act of honesty and courage from a new waitress had created an environment where clarity, respect, and collaboration could flourish. It was a lesson he would not forget. Emma had reminded him that leadership was not about fear or control, but about listening, reflecting, and valuing the contributions of everyone involved. When the final points of the deal were reviewed and agreed upon, Langston leaned back, feeling a rare sense of relief. He looked around the table at his team, their faces showing satisfaction and confidence, and he understood that they had not only survived a tense negotiation but had thrived because of mutual respect and teamwork. Emma quietly continued her work, her presence unnoticed by most, yet she knew the truth. Her courage had helped this $200 million deal stay on track and succeed. Langston reached the last page of the documents, signing the papers with steady hands, his assistants following suit, and the executives congratulated each other quietly. The room was filled with a sense of accomplishment and relief. Emma observed from the side, feeling a mix of pride and humility. She had never imagined that her first day at the Sterling would involve witnessing and indirectly influencing a $200 million corporate merger. But now she knew she had played a role. After the signing, Langston looked toward Emma, catching her eye for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He did not need to speak aloud. His glance expressed gratitude and respect. She smiled quietly, understanding that even the smallest gestures of courage could leave a lasting impact. The atmosphere at the table had changed permanently. Not only had the deal succeeded, but the CEO himself had gained a valuable lesson about leadership, humility, and the power of listening. As Emma returned to her duties, she felt a sense of quiet pride, knowing that her courage had shifted the balance at the table, influenced a high-stakes negotiation, and reminded even the most powerful person in the room of the importance of respect and integrity. The $200 million deal had gone through successfully, and in a subtle but undeniable way, Emma had contributed to that success, a lesson in the power of honesty, courage, and human connection that she would carry forever. The lunch was finally over, and the tension that had gripped the room earlier was completely gone. Richard Langston leaned back in his chair, a small but genuine smile on his face. He felt a sense of accomplishment and relief, knowing that the $200 million deal had been successfully completed. Yet he also understood that the outcome would have been very different without a certain moment of courage earlier. Emma's intervention had made all the difference. As the executives began to gather their belongings and prepare to leave, Langston called for a brief pause, asking everyone to stay seated for a moment. The assistants looked surprised, but they complied, sensing that something important was about to happen. Emma stood quietly at the edge of the room, unsure of what to expect, her heart racing, yet calm. She had never anticipated that her first day would end with such significance. Langston's eyes found hers, and he gestured for her to come closer. Emma hesitated for a moment, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement, then stepped forward, keeping her posture straight and her expression respectful. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how the powerful CEO would address the new waitress who had spoken truth to him at such a critical moment. "Emma," he began, his voice calm but firm, carrying a tone of gratitude, "I want to personally thank you." She blinked, slightly stunned, unsure how to respond. He continued, "Your courage today, your honesty, and your integrity reminded me of something very important. That leadership is not just about authority. It's about respect and awareness of the people around you." Emma felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of pride mixed with humility, knowing that her words and actions had been noticed and appreciated. Langston paused, then reached into a folder he had set aside. Pulling out a small envelope, he handed it to Emma with a sincere smile. "This is a small token of appreciation, not for what you did alone, but for reminding all of us that courage and honesty have value, even in high-stakes situations." Emma accepted the envelope carefully, feeling both honored and slightly embarrassed. She had not expected recognition, yet it was gratifying to see that speaking up had truly mattered. The executives at the table exchanged impressed glances, some offering quiet nods of approval, acknowledging that Emma had influenced the outcome of a significant deal. The assistants whispered softly among themselves, amazed that someone so new could make such an impact, and Emma realized that her actions had left a mark not just on the CEO but on everyone in that room. Her first day at the Sterling had become legendary in her own small way. Langston continued, "Remember this, Emma. Integrity and courage are more powerful than fear or hesitation, and sometimes, the smallest voice can create the biggest change." His words struck her deeply, reinforcing the lesson she had learned throughout the day. She understood now that it wasn't just about serving tables or following instructions. It was about paying attention, acting with honesty, and standing up when it mattered most. Emma smiled softly and nodded, feeling a sense of quiet fulfillment. She had acted out of principle, not expectation, and yet the recognition she received validated that principle in a way that words alone could not. Langston's acknowledgement was more than a reward. It was a lesson in humanity, a reminder that even the most powerful people benefit from honesty and courage, and that everyone, no matter their position, can influence change. After the brief ceremony, the CEO returned to his team, finalizing some notes and offering guidance, but the atmosphere remained lighter, more respectful, and more collaborative than before. Emma returned to her duties, moving gracefully between tables, yet carrying a new confidence. She knew that she had proven something to herself as well as to others, that integrity and courage could shape outcomes in ways she had never imagined. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the other patrons unaware of the dramatic events that had just unfolded. Emma felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that behind the scenes, she had played a crucial role in shaping one of the most important deals of the day. She realized that her first day had been extraordinary not because of her job tasks, but because of the difference she had made. The lesson of courage and impact would stay with her forever. Later, Langston privately invited Emma to his office, offering further thanks and even a small professional opportunity. Recognizing that her integrity and courage were qualities he valued highly, Emma accepted humbly, grateful not only for the recognition but also for the life lesson she had learned, that doing the right thing, even in the smallest moment, can create ripple effects that reach far beyond what one can imagine.